This is the street I live on. It's a quiet street in the outskirts of Canada's capital with mature trees and pretty average 3-bedroom suburban homes. The kind that you'd expect to find in communities across North America. Now, this neighborhood was built in 1969, over 50 years ago, meaning residents here are mainly split between legacy buyers from the 70s, now well into old age, and a new generation of buyers who are ready to bring a new life to the neighborhood. But there's a striking difference between the first generation of buyers who set up shop here over 50 years ago and new couples such as my girlfriend and I who bought in recent years, and that difference is being felt more than ever with first-time homebuyers. Back in 1969, the average house in this neighborhood would have cost around $25,300 to purchase, which is a far cry from the now $450,000 average price for these same homes. That represents an 1,800% increase over just 54 years, which drastically trumps inflation at 773%. So this then begs the question, will the gap between wages and property price points continue to expand, making it even harder for our next generation to finally put down roots through property ownership? One of the beauties of life is that it offers an unlimited number of possibilities and avenues that we as individuals can choose to explore. And if you start asking around or digging online, you'll quickly come to find out that there are two very strong schools of thought as to whether or not buying a home or renting makes most sense long term. And by the way, this video isn't about getting into the nitty-gritty financial details as to whether or not one option is empirically better than the other. On one side, you'll have people like Grant Cardone or Robert Kiyosaki stating that buying a home to live in is a liability and therefore a mistake, and that instead you should be looking to rent where you live. Kinda makes you wonder though why he went ahead and bought an $80 million beach home, but that's a different story. On the other hand though, we have people who think that renting is no different than burning your hard-earned money at the stake and contributing to making your landlord wealthy. But of course, nothing in life is generally that black or white. Rather, each option provides pros and cons for the individual making the decision in question, and this is based on an unlimited number of variables, including income, age, location, and lifestyle, just to name a few. That being said, although achieving wealth is a very difficult topic to accurately associate actionable steps to, well, if there's one common denominator across North American wealth at least, it's that property equity makes up a very high percentage of it. In fact, around 70%, and that's only achievable through holding real estate. So there's really no absolute right answer to this school rivalry, but the wealth-building vehicles of a perpetual renter must therefore become a combination of massive financial discipline, stock market investments, as well as potentially a business venture, which data has proven to be much more difficult to accomplish over time than simply purchasing, living in, and paying off a home. Back in the 80s, 90s, and even 2000s, the real estate landscape was vastly different than it is today, and arguably will ever be again. And this is mainly due to some very basic concepts that you would learn in freshman level economics class. When I was in business school, I learned all about macroeconomics and the impacts that even just a simple supply and demand curve can have on the price of goods and services. This applies to sugar and oil that's pumped out of the ground just as much as it does to housing, where when the floodgates open and demand is through the roof, price points tend to follow. Now, of course, the government can try and manipulate the supply and demand curve by increasing interest rates as they've been doing, introducing new taxation policies, and limiting foreign investments. But ultimately, these are all ineffective band-aid solutions that are simply not addressing the real underlying problem that has to do with the lack of supply in this country. And so, unfortunately, this will probably not have a lasting impact on home affordability over the decades to come. This is a real problem that's caused by a catch-22, where a country that's only hopes for population and economic growth rely on immigration also has the problem and challenges of actually housing these millions of individuals that are coming to the country that probably don't want to be renters forever, and for good reason. So Canada's faced with a real problem here, where by 2032, 100% of its population growth will be attributed to immigration alone, representing an estimated 5.7 million newcomers to the country. That's more than the entire population of the Greater Toronto Area combined and represents a 15% population growth. This wouldn't really be an issue to speak about though, and wouldn't continue putting upwards pressure on the housing market if property development was able to actually scale at the same pace as population is. In fact, even house these nearly 6 million newcomers by 2030, the country would need to somehow build 5.8 million new homes by then to even make a dent on home affordability. At the current rate of development though, we're only looking at 2.3 million new homes by the end of the decade, meaning we'd be 3.5 million homes short by 2030. And don't get fooled by temporarily lower price points across the country right now. Home affordability is even lower than it was pre-pandemic, and higher interest rates are making it nearly impossible for first-time homebuyers to purchase a house and make the numbers work in their monthly budget. Speaking of which, how does that actually impact everyday people looking to purchase a home? Well, I call this the down payment time crunch. As house prices have continued to rise at an astronomical pace over the decades, in contrast to average wages growing at a much slower pace, with this the need for utilizing extremely large mortgage loans to supplement the down payment is even more of a reality than ever before. In fact, since early 2000, the ratio between house prices and disposable income has drastically increased, making home affordability even more of a challenge for first-time homebuyers. Over time, as the price of homes increases, well, so does the down payment required to purchase a home. Even at a mere 5% down, that can represent thousands of dollars for the average first-time homebuyer, where when wages aren't increasing at the same pace, this can become a never-ending cat and mouse game for the buyer. In fact, if we step back in time to the 1980s, it took the average home buyer around 5 years to purchase a home at the conventional 20% down payment, and that is on a starter home, which has become even more of a thing of the past. Fast forward to the modern day market, and it takes the average first-time homebuyer 14 years to finally purchase a home at that conventional 20% down payment, which is why we're increasingly seeing lower down payment options in the 5% range across the market. And for this reason, for many first-time buyers in expensive metropolitan areas like Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, or Montreal, opting for condos has become one of the only options available to finally step away from renting, which is a far cry though from the Canadian dream of the 3-bedroom suburban home with the picket fence. To summarize, the next generation of Canadians that won't have the luxury of having their parents pass down their home and therefore the equity held within it will be faced with a very difficult challenge of breaking away from perpetually renting. As I interact with other Canadians and newcomers to Canada on my YouTube channel, it is clear to me that this will greatly impact future generations and the wealth gap in this country. Interestingly, by 2030, there's estimated to be a 2-to-1 ratio between workers and retirees, which is significantly up from the 7-to-1 ratio that we were seeing in 2010. This means that theoretically, over the next decade or so, we could potentially see a large turnover of properties flooding in the market, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these homes will be any more affordable for first-time buyers. I personally think that moving forward, we could see an increasing amount of families maintaining these homes and assets within their family tree in order to maximize generational wealth, but we'll see what ends up happening. Overwhelmingly though, Canada's housing crisis lies within the inefficiencies and bureaucratic structures of municipal and provincial governments that are bottlenecking the issuance of construction permits that could even keep up with the level of immigration. I really wish this video had a more positive tone to it, but options truly are limited for the next generation that'll be faced with longer rental periods, moving away from large metropolitan areas, and significantly longer time periods to save up for a down payment. So the Canadian dream of home ownership is still alive, but the creative thinking and strategies to get there have undoubtedly raised the bar for many.